Welcome back to Horrifically Well Read, Bled, and Said. Today we are so excited and honored to have Erika T. Wurth, author of White Horse and the recent Haunting of Room 904, which we will be talking about mostly in detail today. And we both absolutely love. Welcome, Erika.
Thank you so much, and I so appreciate you having me. I did you want me to introduce a little bit about myself in the book?
Absolutely.
Yes,
Absolutely.
absolutely, and please do introduce the book, and I will say before I forget, because, um, the other day we were recording, and I was like said something, I was like, "Yeah, you probably should have put a trigger warning up for that book because of the blah, blah," and I was like, "Oh my god, I should have had a trigger warning for the trigger warning." So, we will at the beginning of your book, it does say, and for the rest of this conversation here, we will have some conversations around suicide. So or, just to
Ideation, yes.
yes, talk make sure I put that out there. If that's not for you, please, be aware of that, but I think it is done very well and respectfully, and I think it's important, to I didn't have any issue with it personally,
Yeah.
so but that's not everybody has a different trigger, so I wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we can get more to that, but essentially, I've thought a lot about things like that because ultimately you can't not talk about race or suicide or death or queerness, right? Because if you don't talk about these things, when those things are being persecuted, right? The people in power than you, or they're problematic things like suicide, like then you kind of let them be and they fester, right? So I've thought about, but I still think you're right that it has to be handled well. And I think in Indian country, obviously, the rates of suicide in different places, especially reserves, are higher than, your average national norm. So it's something that I talk about, and I have resources in the back of 904,
I
for
did
because I
see
think that's
that.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
super
kinda
quickly,
did not
I think what it comes down to is, for example, on different reserves, the so a lot of Native Americans went my grandmother went to a day school because she was urban, but a lot of
okay,
Native Americans ended up in what's called boarding schools, and boarding schools
right?
were very, very harsh. People were molested, they were beaten at times, and so obviously, this leaves you with a lot of intergenerational trauma. Additionally, they were like, for example, there were certain reserves in Canada where, like, there was a cluster of reserves, and they were like, "Why are the suicide rates so high amongst our children?" And it was because a priest, one guy, was going to assume reserves, because he knew they were powerless, and he had molested all of their, parents as children, and then that intergenerational trauma continued, and festered. So, really quickly, I did wanna go ahead and take the onus to introduce myself and my work. I'm Erika T. Wurth, right? I'm the author of White Horse and The Haunting of Room 904. I'm also a creative writing professor for 20 years. I have a doctorate in literature. And the big thing, right? The big stuff on my biography, White Horse, I was on Good Morning America, and I was Target Pick of the Month, and I was a New York Times, editor's pick. And so those are like kind of some of the big things, right? And so, what the plot for The Haunting of Room 904, it's a little more complex. And it's kind of funny because I've noticed my male peers, when they have these like really complex plots or work is really driven by language and not plot at all, people will forgive them. But for me, right, it's like, oh, well, there's just a lot going on here. So I try to simplify it when I talk about it, which is to say, it's about an Indigenous woman, right, whose sister has suicided, um, in the infamous, Brown Palace Hotel in Denver, where I'm from, where they're from. And, the night that she does this, she called her sister up, who's, graduated with her PhD, and said, I'm gonna die, you should come here. And she's like, you're being dramatic. Just come join me. So when her sister does die and she wakes up and she sees her sister's ghost, this turns on a series of like powers that she had never had before. So she's seeing ghosts everywhere. Her academic career is destroyed, and she ends up being a paranormal investigator instead. And so, years later, when the Brown Piles calls her and says, someone suicides in this room every year, and now your sister is appearing in this room. We'd like you to solve this crime. She says, no way, right? Until her mother checks in and appears in 904, and she knows she's got 3 weeks to solve this paranormal crime, or her mother dies. And so, yeah, I think that's the shortest I think I've gotten it.
Yeah, I mean, It is immediately like, first of all, I think your writing style is just very I always feel like there's certain books that I start that I'm like, I have to kind of push myself to go, but yours was just I really, really enjoyed your style. I think I mean, I was reading it and Adam's like, I can't believe you're that far through it already. I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm just loving it. And I really feel like so many of the characters some of the things that I really like that you did besides just like the character work is you're describing the one character smoking and then like the scent of the flowers blowing in throughout the windows. And I'm just like, God, I want to be there.
Yeah, you feel it.
I could imagine that. And then there's another time where you're describing, like, the room when she first meets, like, Dorian and just the setup to the room, and I'm like, "God, I wish that was my office," you know, and just I really feel like you can just you do a great setting for all that, but, yeah, I think that's a pretty much a great synopsis of what happens and how it goes, and I know we have a couple of questions here to lead into some of this, but I feel like that's always the most challenging part of the conversation here is to tee the book up the way that makes the most sense and concisely.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I work really hard to make sure like description is evocative and there's some beauty there, but there's still like the structure of a novel really matters to me. And so I try to make sure it's like fun and progressive and you're attached to the characters even if you're maddened by them. So that's at least my goal.
Yeah. No, I think too, it's like when you're talking about the structure, I mean, it breaks so well where you're very interested. There's lots of parts where, you can't wait to get to the next chapter and see what's happening. Like I really felt like it was a scary, very scary. In
Yeah.
fact, Erica, the reason I hadn't read it sooner was because I was such a horror wimp for the longest time. And Adam's like, you can't read this. Cause like it would have been too much for me. And I feel like I've built up enough of a skin because you make some truly scary parts
Mhm.
that I could really enjoy and appreciate now. And that makes me happy that I feel like there's nothing that I could say, oh, I can't read that, and that I can enjoy it. But yeah, I mean, one of the things that I enjoyed the most is like almost at the beginning of every chapter, you'll start out with something being sold off of
I
eBay.
love that.
I just love the characterization, or I guess that's what I'm looking
Yeah,
for,
is
the
that
description.
something
Yeah.
like, do you look those things up? That like, where did that come from? That's such a cool thing.
Yeah, yeah. I was always impressed by like nonfiction elements. For example, in Chuck Palahniuk's work, it gives it this kind
Mhm.
of I can never say this word correctly, verisimilitude. And so I'm like, wow. And now with my voice like going, it's even worse. But yeah, because it gives this kind of like, I don't want it to be snarky, but I think kind of like feeling of truth to it and feeling of like, of, you know, what's in the world. Because yes, I am actually totally obsessed by paranormal objects on eBay. Like I've always looked them up, and there are times in which I'm particularly obsessed by the idea of haunted mirrors, as is obvious. But
Mm,
there are times in which, like for example, they'll sell. I think I even have this in 904. There are all kinds of haunted dolls, and that always seems
yes.
kind of like what I mean. But there are times in which
Mhm.
I'm like, this is actually seems kind of genuinely spooky. And as
Yes.
somebody who's never really experienced anything paranormal herself, I'm infinitely fascinated by it, right? And of course, if I did in real life, like if I saw a mirror, like I have a short story in an anthology about a haunted mirror, and I think, if I bought a haunted mirror and like people were smiling in it that weren't there in the room, I'd probably like mess myself. So there's that, yeah.
I totally agree. And, that's kind of like as the book opens, that's kind of where we find, Olivia helping people essentially that have found or have these things. And I think that that sort of like genuineness of people that also maybe either have not or don't really believe in the paranormal. And then suddenly this item comes in and like their whole lives are falling apart, right?
Yes. Yeah, and I think it's, on one level, you could argue that this is life, like all sorts of things, as I well know, can come in and just like throw you sideways.
Hmm.
But, the other part of me just thinks about, like, really, like, how yes, it would be terrifying, but, like, this sort of proof of another world, right? It's unbelievably
Yeah.
compelling, like, of an afterlife, like, something comes out and it's also too I mean, as a nerdy kid who's also kind of a fantasy kid, I love the idea of portals and keys and stuff like that. It's just. haunted books, books with spells, spell books, as a, and I feel like I don't like people want to talk a lot about, and it's cool. Like I'll talk about that too, intergenerational trauma or indigenous issues for urban Indians. And I want to talk about that stuff. But, I think there's a lot in the book about like, we know these sort of dark academia, gothic elements, and just this idea of like, well, if there is another world, what would it look like? Would it be like this very standard Christian version that people have been sold, or would there be like more like this Narnia or Lev Grossman style version where everything is like an infinite portal to another world and different cultures intersect in those places?
Well, I think Narnia was one of my very first things that I ever fell in love with that, where you just how realistic to step through the wardrobe and go through, and so definitely interested in all of that.
Well, I also think that, while it is very scary to experience something like that, it's kinda like you're saying, there's something oddly comforting at the same time of being like, "This isn't it," right?
Right. Absolutely. And I think my only like my dad was an atheist and I essentially was as well. And then I had a friend who, she kind of grew up in this very, her mom was always like, I saw the devil in the window. She was one of those people. And so my friend was always going, like at one point in our 20s, she was going on ghost hunts. And I was very cynical about them. And I remember she played, it was a tape and it like you could hear everyone that was there distinctly, and then suddenly this voice that was not any of these people saying, white mare," and I was like, "Holy shit." I just thought
Yeah.
that changed things for me. I was like, "I don't see" like, it was clearly human voice, it was clearly not their voice, these voices, and I was like, this changed things for me."
That's really cool, and, it's kind of when you think about your main character here, Olivia, she's one that obviously based on, as you set this book up, there's a lot of guilt that she feels because of what happened with her sister and, her feeling like on one hand, like, as a reader, I totally we all have a friend or family member or someone that you've helped so many times, and at some point, you feel like, "Where is that breaking point?" And then for something that like that to
Yeah.
happen kind of when you've reached that is like your worst nightmare. So she kinda lived that, and then the idea that after that, she's kind of, like, literally kind of had this
Yeah.
whatever you wanna call it, power, vision that's passed on to her now. It's this really sort of, like, really cool representation of that sort of guilt in a really real way that changes her life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, we all can relate to the idea of being close to either family members or friends. And it's exactly like you're talking about, people who kind of push you really hard. And of course, in my case, the Olivia, her sister, has been kind of in and out of rehab and, finally gets out of it, all to join this, what Olivia sees as a cult and take
Mhm.
herself down anyway. And at the same time, she loves her mother, she loves her sister, but she's like, you guys are just, seeing these things to make your life more interesting. It doesn't exist. And then in this moment where she knows what it's like to see things and she feels bad because she thought, my God, my sister lived with this her whole life. And this is part of what took her down. And if I had just understood her better, maybe she would have been okay?
It's so difficult though when you're going through something like that where you're mentally trying to understand something as much as you can and you feel like you've reached the tippy top of exploring all that, and then you go through a lived experience and suddenly you can understand all of it, and every part of your perspective is just broadened in a way that you've never experienced before. But I think that you could easily look back and say, if only I'd known that before, felt those ways, or been able to have that capacity before that. And there's a line in the book where you talk about someone's like, "Oh, you miss your sister," or thinking about your sister, and it was like all the time, always, like, and just how close they were. And I think that there's a lot of for me as a reader, I don't have a sister, so I always like have wanted that, and just imagining that bond of how close they are and how many people do have that like a part of you is really kind of missing.
Yeah, I absolutely. And I don't know, I guess it's not the same for a lot of people, but for many, I think their siblings are, like a kind of speaking of mirrors, a reflection of themselves. They're like, gosh, really, I don't share any more experiences or genetics with, this is the person I share the most of those two things with. So really, it was just an arbitrary turn of fate that made me not them. And, for a lot of people, I think the boundary between their sibling and themselves is very gray. And so, for a lot of reasons, right? And so, yeah, and I think again, like there's no one on this planet for a lot of us that knows more about you than your sibling. And so suddenly when that's gone, it's weird.
Yeah. I'm going to live vicariously because part of the show of what we talk about is therapeutic. So I really enjoy reading about the characters like that because I was raised in definitely like a very dysfunctional household, which was like, I feel like we were almost raised to just not like each other as siblings. Like it was not convenient for our parents to like that. And we're working on a lot of that now as like as adults and hopefully, but it's I wish that I had those things because I see so many people like, as an example, like, it sounds like Monique Asher and her sister, when they talk about their Stay the Night podcast and all these things, like, they
How they're
just
like best friends.
Yes, and I'm just like, "That sounds amazing." Like, I think your family was kind of raised the same way, Adam, where you were just taught to just, like, go separate, be
Yeah,
apart, like, don't
there's a lot of, like, triangulation of,
Y
that is a, difficult thing when that person that is closest to you, and even though you might not like each other very much, you did share all of these formative
Yeah,
with them
definitely.
that, no matter what, you have this connection that is undeniable.
Well, so when I read about this, it's just like I had to imagine like the sympathy or empathy that just that this character is going through of having that level of love and connection. Which I think that's the point of reading the fiction, right? Is that
Mhm.
you gain perspectives like that.
Yeah, and I think it's complicated with siblings, like, I've known people who like, certainly I'm familiar triangulation for sure, and I also know what it's like to feel really, really close to a sibling, but I think a lot of people, they didn't even know their siblings or, they lived in the same house with, they were just so different, right? Even my 2 stepsons, they're close, but they are radically different people. And, my sister and I were not radically different people, but the rest of the world sees us as very, very different, I'd say. But at the same time, like, no matter what, it's complicated, the relationship of the proportion of hate to love to that person and how that works.
Yeah,
Mm.
and I think that's when you think about that, there's a fine line between love and hate. I think sometimes sibling relationships are the best representation of that.
I think that's really what Erica said is that I think we're just my family and I are as we're at this age now, we all get along and we all talk, but I think we are very radically very different people, completely. And some of us are more aligned than others, but I think also finding those things that you can still respect and get along and enjoy on and connecting on that. But I think it's also like that thing of you can pick your friends, but you can't pick your family. Or
Mhm,
people that your friends that you were like, man, I wish you were my family because we're peas in a pod. I love that idea of found family too.
mhm, which is really represented
With
beautifully in this
Alejandro,
book, yeah.
I think, where they're just like they are the best of buds,
Mhm.
like do you have a close friendship like in that way? Just
That it
like
was
a
modeled after them?
yeah, just like a best friend that represents that, or is that just overall just part of imagination?
Excuse me. Yeah, I have like a short list of very close friends. And sometimes that shifts, right? Like people grow apart or they move. But I have some friends that I've known for a long, long time that are absolutely found family. I think what I wanted to do was something kind of fun in this particular book. So I grew up with a lot of queer folks in general. And my mom was also a dance teacher. So there were a lot of gay men, and so like I think it's important to, keep, like that representation really in a lot of my work because queerness isn't just one thing, right? And
Right.
Alejandro, really does love Olivia, but he also is like, I'm growing in a different direction too, and that's if she's not, if that's not for her, but they eventually, she has to let him have room to do that. I think the 3 women who I wanted to show all these different kinds of indigenous women, right? I think people, for example, the Navajo or Diné people are sometimes seen as like very resi, very traditional, and that's all true too. But I wanted to show that a lot of my friends who are from Dineta or the Navajo Reservation are super smart. And so Victoria is like, she's a real estate agent because she enjoys having an easy life, but she's also a member of Mensa, right?
Mm.
She was a philosopher. behavior. And I wanted to show, and she's also very irreverent. She loves where she grew up, but it's not for her. And then there's Sarah, who's indigenous Mexican, which is some part of my background and my main character's background. But a lot of people will malign and say, oh, no, they're not indigenous, or and imagine them to be indigenous when they are. And you can see Sarah's like real, kind of crapped on for that. And so, yeah, I wanted to show like, and here's Sarah who's, queer but doesn't know how to come out and it's just been burning with love for Victoria for decades, right? And finally just has to face it and has to face other things, right? Like how scared academia can make you, as I know I'm in academia, right? And, people can, the jobs are so hard to get that you can be scared into kind of bad or complacent behavior. And so I wanted to show like these friends who really love one another and have fun together and do these fun things together and are very different, but are all educated Indigenous women.
A great representation of showing multiple different angles of experiences that should be showcased.
Yeah, and something that's so interesting about Olivia is that she's basically right at that moment where she's, like, achieved, whatever you wanna call it, the American dream, the highest like, this is what she's aspired to. She's gotten this PhD, and then it kind of, like her entire life's track has to shift, and, I think that the way that you explore, like, her thoughts and her feelings about this is really, really interesting and lends this, like, layer to her character because, you think of in, like, lots of other books, you might have, like, a paranormal investigator, like and that's what they've always done, but Olivia has this, like, incredible background knowledge of, like, all these other things that she's learned, so she's bringing something different when she goes to people and has these experiences, but at the same time, she's also combating, "This isn't the life that I thought I was gonna have either."
Right,
A lot of
right. And I
acceptance
think
in
you
that.
all have to do that, right? Like all of us are like, this is my trajectory, but there's
Right.
no way around it. I did want to be a writer, but I didn't know I would be a professor. I didn't even know that was like a thing people often did to have insurance at the same time, you know? So yeah, that was my trajectory.
Well, one of the topics I wanted to touch on was the character of Josh being the stalker, the relentless ex that just doesn't take no and is just absolutely annoying, but also kind of dangerous, mentally ill, and just wondered if you seem like you always have a purpose. It sounds like just from listening to this
Mhm.
conversation and where it came from. So I wanted to hear more about that.
Yeah, I saw Olivia as this kind of like very smart, educated millennial. She's still kind of young. She does not want to get married. So she dates, kind of people in her world. And Josh is one of them. And Josh is attractive and Josh is moneyed and Josh, thinks she's special, but he's also horrifically toxic. So for her, as a person who does not get attached to anyone but her friends, she's happy to be like goodbye. But I think for him, a lot of it is the ego diminishment of a woman that he felt like, oh, now I'm letting you know you're worthy of me and she's like, "No, thank you." So he cannot let it go, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And he's just like, I mean, she's made it abundantly clear. Uh, she basically has several times that she's got to kind of deal with him and it's at some point, he kind of shows up unexpectedly in her house and she really knows how to protect herself, I guess is what I was gonna say. I mean, I enjoyed that immensely of just, "You motherfucker, you came into my house," you know you know, he starts spitting a whole bunch of other crap her direction of just to really mess with her head, but eventually she throws a punch right into his windpipe, and I just was like, "That's my girl right there. She's
Yeah.
not messing around."
Yeah, I think she realizes, like, I'm a paranormal detective. I should have a gun. I should know how to like, I should study martial arts. I need to know these things because I am a woman in this field and I'm going to strangers' houses and I need to
Mhm.
know how to do these things. And, yeah, it was really kind of funny. One of the editors for White Horse, for example, my first novel with, a Big 5 was like, "Oh my gosh, Erica, do you know about guns? Do you know how dangerous they are? Are you sure you want them in your book?" And I'm like, "Yeah, since I'm an adult, yes, and yes, I do know
Yeah.
about guns. Raised around guns. My uncles were hunters. My dad, was a very He was a really smart guy. He worked for subsidiaries of NASA, but he was also a drinker. And so at one point in his life, he decided like he's going to have a bunch of guns and he held us at gunpoint. So yes, I know about guns, you know,
My.
and yeah, it was awful. Finally my mom did leave him to be clear, but yeah, it's if you understand this is another issue like suicide, right? Guns are I mean, my stepson was in a school shooting, right? Like the STEM school shooting right down the road. And so guns have touched my life in all kinds of ways, but we have to talk about it. And it's also reality. Even for myself, I can say that I have had stalkers. I have felt like I was in danger as a woman. So I've thought about, getting firearms like since I basically know how to use them. But in the end, I've been like, "No." I got a tactical whip though, and that is cool looking. I forget it though,
Ooh,
like,
okay.
I'm probably in trouble with it because in the end, like, I just leave it on my, coat hanger before I leave, but I need to, like, bring my tactical whip with me. But I have really cute feminine looking bags, and it's hard sometimes to fit them in there.
Right. How big is this tactical whip and, like, I
It's
need to
so
know more.
cool. I saw something on TikTok about it. Basically, this woman's an MMR fighter, and she's like, "You don't need a gun, you need a tactical whip." And she's really funny. She's like she was describing, like, I thought I should have given Olivia a tactical whip. This would have been even cooler, right?
Yeah.
So
I
she's
feel
like,
like there's a lot of
"My
pleasure
brother's
in
also an
whipping the
MMA
hell out of
fighter."
someone
And
that's
she's like,
hurting you.
"I've fought him." And she's like, "Look, if you hit someone with a tactical whip, it fucking hurts." And it's just about
I was just gonna say yes.
what I've ever
I
seen.
mean, that's the thing, I mean, we messed around as a kid with, like, whacking each other with belts and, like, if you take the towel, the wet,
Mhm,
like, hand towel and you snap it, I mean, that
mhm.
shit stings, so I just feel like
Something designed to hurt that,
exactly, I
yeah.
feel like you're allowed to take that motherfucker back off,
I'm going
back
down
up.
this rabbit hole tonight,
Right,
so
yeah. Am I getting one for an
oh,
anniversary
yeah, we'll
present?
get matching ones, his and her
No,
tactical
no, no,
whips.
no. I don't think that's the point. I think it's more like
For defense, yeah.
I know. Well, you know what? Maybe that would be good because you could keep that in your classroom.
I don't think that would be allowed, no.
Oh, okay. Alright, alright. Well, for me, I mean, I think that for a lot of, it's interesting because a lot of my friends have been recently, I think we're more, we're can't really say one way or the other here. We align as liberals, my friends and I, but it's, interesting to me how many people that have been traditionally, like, aligned with the right, saying, like, they open carry or they buy guns, but how many of the
Right.
people I know that are liberals that are now
Considering,
purchasing
yeah.
and actually, where it's like they're buying it, whereas, like, if the one person I know, like, this male, the husband has the weed card and the wife has the carry permit because you
Funny.
and the guy get hit, but, I mean, the fact of the matter is, it is for protection, and there's stuff around there, and there are times where you think, there is not a substitution for what you would want a gun to be for, but
Mhm.
I obviously, there's a lot of risks for that, but, at the same time, my good friend, her sister had, she always open carried, was very comfortable with guns, whatever, and her husband just was, like, hitting her the one night, and she was like went and got her gun and was like, "If you come another step closer, I'm gonna shoot you." And he was like, "Fuck you, I'm coming after you." And so they were rolling around on the ground. She got the gun, she shot him in 2 places and he lived, but she didn't get her gun taken away and she wasn't charged or anything,
That is
but
self-defense.
it did save her life, to be able to have it with someone that was
Mhm.
drinking and, just they're not obviously, they're divorced now, but I just think, like, thank goodness she was, armed and able to, experience and able to handle herself.
I think obviously guns I mean, I'm one of those people who thinks there need to be a million like, the whole culture needs to change, period.
Mhm.
Barring that, there need to be all kinds of federal guidelines and limitations for guns, but right now, because of where we are, I kind of don't blame anyone as long as they train themselves to do it. I think the problem is that some people have guns because they wanna show off politically. Like, look
Oh,
how
yeah.
I I vote for Trump and I believe in guns and here's my gun, and they don't even know how to use it. Like, my uncles had guns because they hunted. They hunted growing up, and, there was a utilitarian purpose. Of course, my uncle eventually, had guns because, he liked them. But yeah, like, he did at least know how to use them. He never shot someone he did not mean to shoot.
Well, to your point, I always share the story where the ex-boyfriend of mine had so many guns, and they were cleaning it and being reckless, and guess what? One got discharged into the wall,
Yep, yep.
and I think that speaks to me more about certain type of people that just shouldn't have it, that are just, uh
That it is about clout or as it is
it
about
is.
saying, yeah.
Exactly. Look, I'm gonna be straight up, it would surprise me today if that person is not a member of ICE
But yeah,
because,
yeah, they're
I mean,
the
it's that
number
kind
one
of
target of person.
absolutely, but
Well, it's interesting because, like, to go back to the character of Josh, it's like, just does not dawn on him that somebody wouldn't want him, and that somebody wouldn't want to be part of his life and, like, the life that he believes he's going to have, and I think, like, when you couple that with access to a weapon like that, that's why we see so many awful headlines, right?
yeah, for sure.
I think in The Haunting of Room 904, like me, my character is trying to build an ideal life, an educated life, an intellectual life, a creative life. And she, where she has these friends who share these important things with her. She wants to be free. She knows perfectly well that marriage will not end up probably well for her as it doesn't for so many women. And so she wants to build her life in the way that she wants. And I think unfortunately we all come up to a point where we realize, but the rest of the world doesn't want that.
Yeah,
And there's violence in that. And so I think that's where she finally ends up. And you can see even in her life when, when the public goes after her, when,
mhm,
this woman, who wants to make her career around attacking other women goes after her, right? And that's our and so I think, my main character does what she can to protect herself. But in the end, we're all vulnerable. She's vulnerable to Dorian. I sort of tried my hand at the sort of dark, romance kind of thing, because
mhm.
Dorian's kind of fun gothic, character, and I wanted to see what that was like, so I tried my hand there. You can see, like, in the end, she's still a human being, she's still vulnerable, to somebody,
What's the characterization of him? Edgar Allan Poe crossed with
an Abercrombie& and Fitch model. Yeah.
yes!
Yes.
Yes, and I was like, "Okay, I can see this, dark brooding, but just
Uh-huh.
traditionally really good looking,"
Yeah.
and yeah, so well,
Yes.
one of the things I wanted to chat with you about, and why I was saying at the beginning that I was so really unable to read possession style books or things about the supernatural. The scene at the very beginning where she's helping a lot of people, and these people come to her saying that they have this book, and just they thought it was gonna be all fun and games and buying off, and they're like, "Now we're kinda stuck with it, can you help?" That shit was so intense and scary, but I mean, the only thing I can relate it to would be, like, those some of those scenes in, oh my gosh, the Mallerman's book, the
Incense around the house.
yes, where you're like, "What the hell's happening here?" But wake honestly, and I don't mean it, but to me, I just it was God was swirling in the room with you, Erica, and, like, the way the temperature drops and, like, the disorientation and just at some point, she's like, "Okay, what's real and what isn't?" I don't wanna spoil this if anyone hasn't read it yet, but it was genuinely like, "Okay, how is this she gonna get out of this? This is really intense." And I just think that you can really craft an atmospheric scene. And again, just with the rest of the pacing and the character development, like, that makes it that you care so much about them already of what is it going to happen here?
Yeah, moving backwards to Mallerman, I am such a fan of incidents around the house, and I know it's divisive, but why, I build mansions. You know what I mean? I do. Like, there are these interstitial kind of chapters with the two spirit character from the past who's coming up into the current plot line. I have, the eBay listing, stuff like that. What I admire about incidents around the house is that, like, if he's sort of, like, doing this beautiful spare Scandinavian chair of a book, right, I'm doing, like, this big again, like, in a mansion. But the way he structured that thing, it was so to me anyway, so frightening. And what I tried to do when I kinda, like I was always as a kid, I was a nerd and I read horror and science fiction and fantasy, and I kinda got out of that during PhD school, and I realized at a certain point, especially reading Lev Grossman's work and Rendezvous with Rama and watching Doctor Who, I'm like, "This is where I belong, this is what I wanna do." And so I had to rebuild, and horror is a great space, right, interstitial space between literary realism, which was what I was trained in, what I wrote in, and, like something that's really challenging, like I'm working on now, that's like alternative timeline and stuff like that. Because you're often still in the real world, unless you're talking about like S.A. Barnes or something whom I just love, like her space war. But
Mhm.
I think you're still in the real world, but you still have to craft like these supernatural elements. And so one of the things I wanted to do was I looked at film, like, all right, here are the films, that are like incidents around the house that are crafted so simply, like paranormal activity, right? How do they do that? How do they make me scared but compelled? And it's because they
Mhm.
have, for some people, horror is just gore and screaming, right? To me, that's not scary. That's like, boys with boogers, like, thanks, but no thanks. What You know what I mean? Like, what's scary is what I call girl horror, right? Which Stephen King is very much a girl horror writer because he cares about the slow burn, he knows how to structure a scene, he knows how to end it at the right time, he knows how to build it. There's, like, just one little thing off, and another little thing off, and then, like, it builds and builds. So I really worked hard to do that, and I think atmosphere is a lot about, like, has it's it's everything to do with that and timing, right? Like, how does it smell? How does it look? When do you do what, and how do you build fear around? And it's hard.
You really play with the tension, like dial up and down and, stretching that out, and that I think is part of what makes a scene like that. It and same thing with an incidents, which I absolutely loved that book.
Yeah, me too.
That's I think that's why, like, that's the only other book I can think that I powered through as fast as I was reading The Haunting of Night of 4. So, I'm glad you like it so much, and interesting enough that when we had been on the watching Mallerman on, Novel Nightmares, he was saying that Paranormal Activity was, like, the one movie that scared the shit out of
Yeah,
him.
that he just
So
sat in his car afterwards, just stunned.
and other people he was with didn't get, but I love how you're saying, like, you bring that up about the film, and but I think that's really it, is just how and then you mentioned, like, he's doing the Scandinavian furniture, but you're building, like or, type style, but
The mansion,
you're
yep.
building the mansion, and then that's basically how Kat's house was, of just this amazing, elaborate home that, it's like, wow, when you walk inside, and she was just such a fun character, like, I know she's kind of a bitch, but at the same time, like, I would wanna be her friend. She seems so fun.
Doesn't she? Yeah, I wanna like, she's very noir. She's very, like, 1940s, she's smoking
Yes,
with a giant where they called, like, I think she even does at one point, like, with the those, like, attachments that you put on the cigarette
the
so you can, like,
holder,
hold
yeah,
Yeah.
singer.
cigarette holder, you know?
Just her attitude, though, of just like, "I don't give a shit. I'm just gonna
Mhm.
say," it's like, "Oh, no, I don't think you wanna see me." "Oh, why not?" Just I had a knife to his throat the last time, you know?
Right, right.
So
You
nonchalant.
gotta love those kinds of characters. I've always wanted to build because all of my characters are kinda, like, tough and noir to some small degree, but she was like, I wanted to push it all the way there.
I like people like that where they're not afraid to tell you the truth of what it is, like, "I had the knife to his throat," but that's all they're gonna tell you, and then you're like,
No
"Wait,
context, like,
what?" Like, yeah, hold on, back up, and I think that makes it so intriguing and just
mhm.
built in, yeah, so fun.
Keep 'em wanting more.
Yes, yes.
Definitely, definitely.
I think that's the thing I had to learn, like, when I don't know if you had any questions built in this regard, but when I was learning to, like, because I'd always said to other, like, literary writers, like, "I really love story and structure," and they just were, like, not that into it. And I was like, "Well, I really am." They were like, "I don't know, you maybe should take a screenplay writing class." But when I read books that were, more like craft books that were more like commercial, they at least discussed that. They would discuss like, Save the Cat Writes a Novel, but discuss like, this is how you build a scene. This is how you structure a novel. I just want to know where anybody put the things. Similarly, Jane Cleland's Mastering Suspense, Structure, and Plot, or Chuck Palahniuk's craft book. I always forget the name of it. There's a big pencil on the front, right? Ben Percy's Thrill Me, Chuck Wendig's Damn Fine Story, they tell you how to build a catalyst, how to build a clock, a red herring, and like when to end a scene and how to have like a chapter built so that that tension, that power is going back and forth and then it's ending in the place that it's the most compelling to make you keep going forward. And I think a lot of literary writers or people who see themselves that way, whatever that word means to them, they'll say, well, those things are manipulative and they're not valuable. And I'm like, fiction is manipulation. it's really okay. Like, your job is to get people to feel something, and that is through manipulation through craft, and I think relearning how to do that and reading the right books that showed me how to do that was really valuable.
It's valuable as a reader too, and I think that if you read enough books, you can tell someone who does have that level of craft because it just flows. I think there's no work on the reader's behalf of having to try to, where you look at people that are like, I got this far in, or I had this high of hopes, or I had to DNF this. I feel like a lot of times when someone's really good at building these things and you don't hear those feedbacks. And one of the words I heard you say earlier was I was trained in this. I was skilled in that. And I feel that you can tell that. And whether that's I'm a very visual person, whether that's someone who's like, what's the difference between how you cut your own lawn and how a landscaper cuts your lawn? Like, okay, they know something different that all of a sudden that shit looks really nice.
Mhm.
And then same thing with like a chef where it's like, well, did you marinate this? And did you cook it like this? And did you let it rest? So the juices like there and when you think about if you know those techniques and why wouldn't it be that way where I think some people might be inherently talented in writing and have great stories in their mind and compelled but it's adding that extra level of, like, training and skill of practice and practice. Let's even think of, like, a ballerina or someone that trains and develops. I feel like you can tell that in your work, that it feels like effortless, but I'm sure it took a lot of effort on your
And
part
thought,
to
yeah.
do it, to make it feel effortless for me as a reader.
Yeah, that's what's kind of, I think, the part of literary culture, academic culture that was so toxic because they kind of trained people to think like, "Oh, if you're really a genius, you don't have to do anything but read a bunch of books and then just start hammering away on the keys." And what a silly thing to think for a bunch of people with advanced degrees who should know better. Like, do you tell a surgeon, "Hey, you know what? If you're really a genius, you don't you don't have to practice cutting on people. You can just sort of like read a bunch of about a bunch of surgeries and then just perform one." So,
Yeah, it's
you
crazy.
know,
That's so
you know
crazy.
what I mean? Yeah, and so I think, like, what I love is I love it when people are concrete because then it's like then it eliminates class and race and gender barriers where you have accessible ways in which you can train yourself through a degree, through a craft book, through practice, through discussion, through workshop. And so to me, as much as, mysticism around the idea of writer is neat, it's not worth that kind of like toxic mythology.
You know that quote by Bruce Lee where he's like, "I don't fear the man who's practiced" it says, like, something like 1,000 hours, "I fear the man that's practiced 1 kick 1,000 times."
Yeah.
Where he's just like, it is a like a kick of excellence, right? It's
Mhm.
gonna be perfect, and I think when you're really good at something like that or just several different points, it all comes together, and I would love to see now I've never taken a class or, I've never had the experience where some of our authors have an MFA, but just I would love to see someone actually break down of like, well, here's this and here's where we use that and this is this structure and just because to me I'm
Almost
just
like a director's commentary
I
of a
guess
book, yeah.
yes or like if you would basically take off the drywall. I want to see the bones of the book,
That's what I do in my advanced courses. Like, so in my advanced fiction courses, I basically have them read the Save the Cat Beat Sheet chapter. And people will say it's paint by numbers. And I'm like, really, is it? Because and let me tell you what I do, and then I'll tell you my analogy, which is
Yeah.
Okay.
I with a beat sheet chapter, I have them read Ring Shout by P. DeJelly Clark because I think it's
I
like
I
crosses so
just
many
finished
genres.
that like 2 days ago.
So good. Oh my god, he's so good.
So good.
And so I have them, like, tell me where all of the beats are in that novel, then I have them
Okay.
write a beat sheet for their own novel. And it really helps because then it's concrete and you can see, like, this should go there and that should go there. And a lot of people in the literary world will say, like, "Well, isn't that paint by numbers?" And I'm like, Is it? Isn't it you're just asking the wrong questions?" Because, for example, every good
No, I
novel
think there's elements that
does
are always critical to something that's good, right?
absolutely. Like, you have a catalyst, and there are a billion instead of saying, "Well, why do you have to have a catalyst?" Instead, you could imagine that there are a billion ways to do a catalyst, and that I always say, like, I know this is gross, but people in the literary world will be like, "Look, it's a brownie. It's a postmodern brownie. And instead of having, like, chocolate, it's poop and sticks. No one wants to eat that brownie, and it's not a brownie. I don't want the postmodern brownie, and there are more ways to make a brownie, and, like, lots of different people like different kinds, like, some people like it fudgy or cakey or with nuts or a blondie, but, like, it's still chocolate, you know what I mean? And so, like, I feel like instead of asking these sort of infinite wrong questions, really dive deep and ask yourself, what is the catalyst that would kick off my novel, only my novel? And what would be the way that would make it the most interesting? And I think that's a better question.
Absolutely. It's like when you're talking here, I'm thinking like, it's the Subway or the Chipotle of how do you want to customize it and make it your own. It's like, but it does still need to have like a protein, a fat, and a carb in order for it to really taste good. And
Mhm.
that's just
Yes.
going to always be the case, right?
Yeah, and I even have, like, it's such an interesting, like, there aren't great craft books that are about how to write alternative plots and structures, but there is like, for example, like, how would you break down Cloud Atlas, which is one of my favorite novels, and it has multiple timelines, multiple points of view, right? Well, there is this place on the internet, this woman who did her MFA forever ago, and she studied with filmmakers, and they're much more concrete in terms of how they define these things. So it's called Ingrid's Notes, Alternative Plots, Alternative Structures, and it is so cool. And I've always like she's basically abandoned writing. I've never seen her. I haven't seen her put anything up in years. And so I actually culled from her site, not because I want to plagiarize, but because I'm so afraid it'll eventually go down. And
Yeah.
it's so cool. She'll show you like the spiral technique and this technique, and it's so interesting. I love when people are concrete with craft.
It's incredible. I'd love to. I'm sure you and I'll peruse that afterwards.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Um, I had
She's so sh
recently purchased one of the books by Chuck Wendig on his.
Gentle writing advice, yeah.
Yes, I just because I think when I was in college, we were looking at the Stephen King's.
On writing.
Yes,
Right.
but I mean, I'm not writing, but I feel like that's something that just having some of those, I think, is special that it's put down to paper of
I think it
teaching that craft is it's something valuable to me.
as a reader, it definitely gives you even more insight into how skilled, a writer is when they're creating something, and I think that that definitely, like, lends a depth when you know those things about.
I love Wendig in general. Chuck is a nice guy. He's a terrific writer. He's great when it comes to craft, and, he and I have had many conversations about, things we have in common over the years, just a good guy, great guy.
Yeah, we've gone to see him a few times for different events, and he just hearing him talk is just enthralling. He just has a way of captivating you through words, either spoken or on the page, right?
Both for sure. He's very brilliant, fast,
Passionate,
and
funny as hell.
funny. Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Abs
I feel like there's a lot of books that he's known for, but my favorite is the Black River Orchard because
Mhm.
I just feel like
Yeah,
that one doesn't get talked about as much as, like, Staircase and other things, but I really loved it.
I haven't read it yet. I can see it right here on my bookshelf, and I need to absolutely, 'cause
When
I'll
you
read
do,
it.
you have
He's
to
one of those
tell us what you think.
Well, I
I
think it's
will.
very, in a way, almost propulsive of or, you know, not propulsive, that's not the word, just very the behaviors of today
Yeah.
shown through apples, of just how
Yeah,
much society can seep into you, so I would love to
yeah.
actually anyway,
Well,
so
one thing I really wanted to ask, because we were speaking to another author who was talking about how he liked to create towns and make things that didn't actually exist. But both Whitehorse and now The Haunting of Room 904, it is very, like, grounded in this very real place, and I've never been to Denver, but I feel like I could find these places because of your writing, that you talk about, and I just wanna, hear a little bit about how, a city can be a character and having it, do that, but then also the reason he said he likes to create 'em himself is people are always gonna say, "Oh, that's not where that is," or "That's not exactly how that is," and kinda balancing saying, "This is Denver as I know it, and this is Denver in reality," and saying, like, "This is I'm gonna put this in this book, and, you have real places, all this kind of stuff. I just think it's so cool and grounds it, and it's so fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. I know we're coming to the end of the hour, but I White Horse is, basically a Denver Indian bar for, like, 50 years, and it finally closed. It was so sad. And then Tattered Cover, right? Of course, it's owned by Barnes& and Noble now, but it's still, there, and when I was a kid, there was this huge it was like a book mansion. I mean, it was a storyteller, beautiful. I mean, it's just this and an astonishing place to go get a book, and I went there all the time with my dad. But yeah, I wanted to like, in Whitehorse, it's kinda like Gen X Denver, and then in 904, it's kinda like, millennial Denver, and I tried to get in a chapter with Meow Wolf, if you guys have heard of it, but, my editor kept excising it.
Well, very cool. So we're very excited and happy. We're coming up on the year anniversary of its release. It's now the paperback. What's the date, or is that
Yep, March 18th, and so this is, like,
March
really
18th?
perfect.
Perfect. Love that. So hopefully a whole new readership that was waiting for paperback will be discovering it too. But it was, such a pleasure to talk to you. And we just will definitely be continuing to support this awesome book.
Yes, I just was, like, wondering if there's anything we could look forward to, coming up soon
An
and just
alternative timeline book, it sounds like, which is
yeah, that's what I
awesome.
was like, I hope we could yeah, that I would like to know and also just, where we can keep up with you because I know I had been watching a lot of your TikTok videos, but I
Mhm.
because of their privacy policies, we both kind of uninstalled it, which I
Yeah.
missed, but anyway, I wanted to just make sure we closed out with those 2 conversations.
Yeah. So I am working on another novel. I've signed with this guy named Mark Gottlieb at Trident. And so I'm hoping it'll be a series. Well, we'll have to see, because I've heard that they're harder to sell these days. But the book I'm working on is about a woman who, when she was a kid, she was walking with her auntie and she saw this like little person and it just disappeared into thin air and it changed both of their lives. Like, her auntie, like, disappeared in Appalachia trying to find something like that again, and then the main character kind of gets her PhD in anthropology, or do I make it sociology? I think I made it sociology, and, wants to sort of prove the existence of supernatural beings who are like otherworldly beings in different native communities, and one of them is in Appalachia. So she goes to do some of her final research in Appalachia, and this woman, entity called the Old Woman, or Cherokee call her Atlanta, begins to haunt her. And, she draws her further and further out into the woods until finally she ends up at this cabin where she goes in there and there is a mirror, of course. I love a mirror. And eventually she goes through the mirror and she is in an alternative timeline where genocide never occurred. And all of these native people have these powers. And they're kind of like, but they're also super advanced. So in some ways, it's more of a science fiction novel. So in this alternative timeline, the Americans were able to kind of use all of these native people who are living in a pretty good way, like advanced technology way, but they use their powers to have control over like the world, right? And so at a certain point, they know that they're trying to eliminate them and eliminate indigenous people in all timelines with this really powerful AI that sort of came back in time and like appeared to the Americans to and
Well,
so
you're the
she's
coolest.
out of the world. So I'm super excited about it. Like, it came to me because one of my friends, I was telling them, I was like, "Yeah, one of my ancestors was born in this thing called District 11." And he's like, God, that's so Nazi-esque. And I
Yeah.
was like, somehow in that moment, like, and I asked a person who is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of in North Carolina, and she was like, yeah, that was when the Americans took the land over and they just gave them numbered districts in between that and, English names. And so just for some reason it caused this explosion in my head. And I was like, I want to write this more alternative timeline novel.
Incredible. Like, I
Yeah.
cannot wait.
Yeah, I'm sold.
Yeah.
Very, very,
Yay.
very creative and cool and,
Yeah,
oh,
that
can't wait.
Thank you guys. I appreciate that. I'm like on a page 170, but these sci-fi fantasy novels, they're bigger. So I think this is gonna be a bigger baby.
yeah.
I'm okay to have a larger tome,
Yeah,
very much so. Well, thank you so much again for your time. We'll close out here and you're always welcome back anytime you'd like to come, and we've enjoyed the conversation with you.
completely. Thank you.
Oh, me too. Me too. Thank you so, so much, you guys. And you guys have a good night.
Yes, have a great night and feel better.
I will. Thank you so, so much. Bye.